Ciuccarelli. I'm from Politecnico di Milano. I'm here for the second year. I was at MIT last year. I work at Politecnico di Milano in the design department, and I also founded and led a research lab that works with interfaces for data. So our aim is to make data more meaningful for different kind of stakeholders in different kind of contexts and situations. And I'm particularly happy to be here in the role of chair of this panel. And in a way, I've been promoted. I mean, last year I was a panelist, and this year I'm chairing a panel. But the reason I'm happy is not because of the promotion itself, but because, I mean, last year I wasn't in the industry panel, and we succeeded, I think, in putting on the floor an actor that was more or less in a way absent, that was the user. So we succeeded in putting on the center of the scene, I'm not sure it was in the center, someone that it was missing, the user. And that happens last year, and so we started a discussion, we started a conversation about the user, and I see this panel today as a kind of an evolution in this path, and I'm happy when I see a trend. I mean, that is, I would say, quite promising. And last year, when I proposed, I mean, this discussion around the user, we identified two, let's say, negative forces that goes against this central position of the user. One was the many black boxes that we have to face, so legal, technological, and bureaucratical black boxes that make people not understanding what we are doing in this community. So that was the first negative force. And on the other side, what we can call the black mirrors. So projections, negative projections that are projected especially by the media on certain concepts, like, for example, anonymity. So there are some black images that are, in a way, creating barriers between the user and some potential solutions for the problems we are tackling here. But at the same time, last year, we started discussing some positive forces, design forces, I would say, that can contrast these negative images and forces that we identified last year. So the role of the panel today, be prepared, is to reframe, in a way, data transparency, as Telefonica is trying to do in many occasions, starting with this idea of empowering the individuals and put really the user at the center. So what I expect today is to add new perspectives. These 4 arrows are the panelists, here. And add new perspectives, identify new, let's say, negative forces that we have to cope with, but at the same time to identify also new potential design forces that we can put against these negative dimensions. So that's what I expect from the panel. These 4 arrows represent, there is no order in the arrows, but we have Nathan Kinch from Meeco, where he is lead of user, of experience. That's the position. Then we have Arianna McClain from IDEO, where he's a designer there. And then we have, this is the order, I will ask you to intervene, Marek Tuszynski from Technical Tech, a non-profit organization dealing with this kind of topics. And then we have Laura Forlano from the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he deals with design and other topics that we will see. So, I mean, we will can anticipate you also questioning this idea of centrality of the user. So that's why I'm looking forward in this trend. So today we will speak about user centricity, but I would like to end the topic questioning this idea of the centricity of the user. Is really the user the one that we have to put at the center of the scene? So these are the questions. So who is really this user? What are the negative dimensions we have to fight against, and what kind of transformation, design transformation especially, we can contrast with these negative dimensions? So Nathan, what do you think about who is this user? What are these negative dimensions, and what are the positive forces that we can put on place?
Thanks, Paolo. Something that's particularly important to us at Meeco is reframing design challenges from the perspective of first-person technology. And this is really flipping the market on its head from the way that it currently works. I couldn't actually find a definition for first-person technology. Like, if you follow Doc Searles from Harvard, he talks about this quite a lot, has some excellent narrative associated with this, but came up with this yesterday. First-person technologies give people the agency to determine the interactions they have. So the reason that we're reframing the way that we approach design challenges is because we believe there's a power dynamic that's shifting. For a long period of time, let's say the best part of a decade, organizations have been able to acquire, store, analyze, and profit from personal data. But individuals have never had those capabilities, nor have they had the agency to be able to do that in the first place. We operate primarily in Europe, and the regulatory environment in Europe is conducive to this change that we're seeing. So it's supported globally, but it's particularly profound in Europe. When we look at the market and where we believe the market is moving towards, we don't see a B2C, a B2B model necessarily being the most prevalent. We see this idea of me to any, which again is flipping the market on its head. So it's first-person technology enabling an individual to have the agency over the interactions that they have with people, organizations, and things. When we think about 20 billion connected devices by 2020, they're all going to have identities. They're all going to want to use our data. They might want to use our data in a physical location. So there's kind of a profound impact there. And this idea, or this me to any view, is the way that we look at the world, and that's how we've reframed the way that we look at design. So how this kind of manifests itself, we're not trying to move to this me to any market immediately. It's not realistic, and the market's not ready. But what we do is we enable Meeco's platform, which is effectively a facilitator of consent-based interactions, to support people in doing stuff that they do day to day. Like at the moment, if you try open a bank account in the UK, it takes 18 minutes and 45 seconds on average. That's if you successfully pass your identity checks. Depending on the data that you look at, 40 to 60% of people drop off during that process, and the two reasons that they cite, number one, length of time, number two, the amount of personal information the bank is asking for. So by enabling someone to reuse an existing identity credential, think of something like a gov.uk verify, if anyone's familiar with some of the work that's going on with digital identity in the EU. By enabling someone to reuse that existing credential, we can help them open a bank account in 1 minute. It has a level of assurance that the bank is willing to accept. And so we've reduced a lot of that friction, and the unit economics of the product actually improve quite significantly. And then at the end of that process, we support the bank to give all of that data back to the person. So they move into a position of agency and into this new me to any world, but they've done it via this really familiar transaction. And then what I thought I'd do really quickly yesterday was paint a view of how we see this working as we progress towards the future. Like, what does me to any actually look like? And so I've put together a couple of the designs. The red doesn't really work there. But in this particular example, it's actually my wife's Meeco account who's sitting there in the front, just to throw her right under the bus. She wants to go on a dream holiday to the Amalfi Coast. And because she has agency over her identity and her interactions, she engages in a conversation, and conversational UX is really hot at the moment, and there's probably a lot of opinions on the panel about whether it's good or not, or where it's headed, but engages in a conversation with, let's call it an agent or a bot that's actually acting on her behalf. So it isn't an algorithm that's been optimized by Google, it's been optimized for Bianca. And we see those types of interactions becoming really, really prevalent. It is genuinely person out, and that kind of requires us to think very, very differently. We often think about human beings and the data that we associate with those human beings as being a material that we utilize in order to deliver our value proposition or target better advertising. And if we totally flip that dynamic and look at it from the perspective of me as an individual, and this is the way we all look at the world, right? It's me, there's one me, and there's many others. It changes the way that we approach design. And that's the way that we're sort of approaching this market, and maybe we can unpack that further over the next few minutes. So thank you very much.
Okay, so you saved a couple of minutes from your time, so I can ask questions. So making this experience, let's say, easy and...
That mentality is probably not the right way to go. What I think the market has learnt generally is that utility always trumps privacy. Sensitive word at the moment, I know, but it always trumps privacy. It always trumps security because we have jobs to be done. We have things that we're deeply motivated and that we care about. And so utility has to always win. But why can't privacy, security, trust, etc., consent? Why can't they be built into the interactions as a foundational element? And that's kind of our view. It shouldn't be this or that. It should be this and that. And I think, we can have we can have our cake and eat it too. But if you look at different user types, some people might want really granular control of their life. And we know those types of people. Other people, they don't want control. They want the feeling of control, but they just want someone to handle it for them. And where the market and the tools and the capabilities are moving towards is that we will be able to support both of those behavioral types and many, many others.
Okay, Arianna, what I like from the work that she will present, I think, today is the focus on language. So, I mean, design, especially communication designers, they work with language, and so I really like the idea that using language, using visual languages, for example, or using the capability of designers to translate sometime data or other kinds of information into something else, maybe we can help, in this, raising awareness, but also making people more in control of what they do. So how does it happen?
As it relates to this topic. It's such a small word, right? But it means so much. There's computational data, there's machine data, there's financial data. Today we're talking about customer data, also known as human data. And I've often noticed that digital products and services often forget that the data that they're collecting represents people's attitudes and needs. And that behind every single one of those ones and zeros and those clicks and those search terms, that there is a person with a story. So for a minute, I want us to think about people as a metaphor or data as a metaphor for people. Let's imagine that after this panel, I'm speaking to Nathan here, and he's like, hey, Arianna, how much money do you make? And I'm like, what? Why are you asking that? That's so personal. He's like, I swear I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just curious about how much an IDEO designer makes. And maybe after a little bit of coercion, schmoozing, that's better, I tell him. And then he goes and tells someone else. And two things have happened, right? First, I'm like, how dare you? This is private. He's like, don't worry, Arianna. I didn't tell anyone your name. But I'm like, well, you told somebody you met an IDEO designer in New York at a data transparency conference. She's female, she's black. That's so easy. I'm like honestly the only one at my office, so like you'll know it's me. It's like it's personally identifiable. Well, what if it was more personal than that? What if it was my sexual orientation? What if it was Facebook data? What if it was census data? If we sit and we think about Peter Thiel and everything that happened in Gawker, it's questionably immoral. I've kind of come to the conclusion, you guys can push back, that by calling it all data, calling human stories data, makes people forget the difference between man and machine. It makes it an object. It objectifies it, and it makes it something that's very easy to own and sell. And it makes it something in which people forget that they're losing their identity, because most people don't actually know what data is. So what I want to share with you guys really quickly.
It doesn't work.
Okay, crap. I will need to be rejiggered about what I was supposed to say. A few months, maybe about a year ago, I had the opportunity to work with a really large tech firm to understand the conditions in which would make their customers want to share information with them and to trust them. And not that surprisingly, what we found was that people want to share data online, not that much different than how people want to share data in real life. They want to share it with people that they trust. And so for some reason, and what I was going to pull up were a few design principles that we have about how to make people trust you. And if I can think about it from the top of my memory, I believe they were give me the gist. Give me the gist. Do you have them? Okay, it'll arrive in minutes. I'll wait.
What's going on?
Huh? I know. Yeah, show me. That is one. It's the last one. That's the third one. How are you guys doing today? I always say that I will be convinced that robots will take over our planet when we can get this stuff working efficiently. You know, or if I'm in the bathroom and I'm trying to wash my hands, if that water always turns on, I'll be convinced that AI is about to take over. Yeah, are we good?
Yes.
We're almost there. Yes. Uh-oh.
That time to redesign a message is going to come up like this is too high fidelity.
Yeah.
Sorry. Do you want to ask a question, Paolo?
Yeah, any questions, any thoughts on that?
So we move.
I think we should close tabs.
Let's move to
All right, well, I can let someone else. Okay, anyways, so high level, we often forget when we interact with people digitally that it's not that much different than how we want to interact with people in real life, right? So you want someone to sort of give you the gist. And what that means is that there's this tendency for, oh, I now have a photographic memory of what I was supposed to say. So, oh, yes. This is even better. Yes, okay.
Sorry, Arianna.
No worries, next slide. This isn't working, so we're just gonna do this old school. Next slide.
Next slide.
Back. Okay, so as we sit and we think about it, how we try to get people to trust us online isn't that much different than how I might ask a favor of you in real life. I might ask you to give me the gist. So supposedly, I went up to you and I was like, hey, tell me all of your personal information, right? And you're like, what? And I give you this like very long reason. You're like, just give me the gist. Why do you really, really want my information? Tell me in a sentence. Speak like a human. You don't want me to come using language you don't understand. You don't want me to use big words that are multisyllabic and legal text. Like, you want me to talk to you like we're equals. If possible, show me versus tell me. So there's this tendency to give tons and tons of text. Draw me a quick photo. I'm a designer. What we can translate to each other by drawing an ugly Post-it is so much more effective than if I just keep telling you what I'm thinking. Ooh. And last but not least, give me a choice. In real life, I can't just tell you I want all of your information. You would try to compromise with me. You'd be like, well, maybe I'll give you some of this, but not all of this. But I've noticed that when it comes to legal agreements and policies, it's all or nothing. So I want to give you guys a few quick examples. Next slide. Like I said earlier, I went to the Facebook Privacy at Scale conference a few months ago, and Professor Omri Ben Shahar, I hope I pronounced his name right, showed him holding the Apple iTunes privacy policy, and it was 30 pages and 9-point font. Is that honestly giving people the gist of what you're signing up for? Next slide. What if privacy policies were designed for extreme users? So I've noticed that lawyers have this tendency to want to be thorough and accurate. But the people who actually need to understand this, who actually are implementing the privacy policies, they're not quite getting it. So what if the extreme user was people with low literacy? At IDEO Design Firm, we like to design for the extremes. We just designed a voting booth. And yes, we want to design for the people who are handicapped, because if it works for the handicapped and it works for the blind, it'll work for everyone. I think that perhaps, what if privacy policies said, these are the top 3 things that you should know. I think terms of service didn't read is a great example that companies can start thinking about as they think about designing clear privacy policies that give people the gist. Next slide. I've also noticed that in the legal profession, and my mom is a lawyer, there's this movement to change from legalese to plain language. But perhaps plain language isn't enough, and we need to move from plain language to human language. Next slide. So what if privacy policies use words and statements and summaries that most people actually understand? So at IDEO, we do a lot of one-on-one user research, and we have people sign consent forms. But now, in the digital age, we're prototyping online. And so we were like, uh-oh, we don't want to give people our consent form and not have them fully understand what they're signing up for. So we created an interactive consent form where it had this high-level legalese on top, but then there was a little speech bubble next to it saying, why do we want your media? Why do you want to consent to use our media? Well, sometimes we use the pictures on our project work to explain what we do to other designers and clients. That's actually what we're using it for. Because otherwise, if we say consent to media, you're like, why are you taking my photo? Why do you want this information? Well, that's not how we're planning on using it, and we're specifically, in human language, trying to explain why. Next slide. Show me versus telling me. Who wants to read 30 pages of 9-point font of an Apple iTunes privacy page? I don't have time for that. So what if, next slide, privacy policies provided visuals versus bombarded people with text? So this is an example of something that we designed for a health app. And it can be more complicated, and this isn't the most beautiful visually designed. I'm not a visual designer, I'm more of a design strategist. So this is Arianna's version. But what if we could show you how your data is working? I think this is way clearer than pages and pages of text. And this isn't meant to replace the pages and pages of text. It's meant to kind of accompany it, so at least you get a quick sense of what's going on. Next slide. And last but not least, give me a choice. As we said, most products and services either say you have to agree to everything in their legal agreement or to nothing. In real life, if someone approached me and they said you have to agree to everything or nothing, that would never go down. Why is it okay digitally? Why is it okay online? So next slide. What if there were different versions of a product based on what people were willing to share? I think Facebook is doing a relatively good job in helping you share maybe a photo of others, but nobody's actually doing that with the back-end data. So it's like, yes, it's the outward stuff, it's your photos, it's your comments. You can then say, I want my friends or the public or only me to see it. But no one, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm open to hearing examples of this, there's not actually really any great examples of people doing it with the data that's going into the algorithm. What if I don't want the data that you are going to go back into the algorithm? Thinking about the election, I want to see other points of view. I don't want you to feed me what I'm liking. I want you to feed me what I'm not liking. We don't have that choice yet, but I think that there's an opportunity, hopefully, where we can. Thank you.
One very brief question as we lost some time with technical issues. And as I said, I'm particularly interested in the translation, these two of your 4 points. Mm-hmm. And in any translation process, you miss something. I mean, there's something that gets lost. So do you think any danger in translating all these legalese and yeah, we gain in simplicity, we gain in something that is more immediate, but there is the risk that we miss something that could be important for.
Yes, there is a risk, but as a designer, you can't be afraid to prototype until you get it right. And I think the first time you do it, it'll be wrong, but then you keep iterating until it gets to a great point. You also have to realize you can't design for everyone. And so when we say what are the top 3 things, what do they need to know? And I think that what we're doing right now isn't working, and so anything is probably better than what we have now. But
okay, Marek, so far we saw companies and agencies like IDEO. What could be the role of someone like you that comes from a kind of a different reality and that is so good, that's my opinion, in provoking something on the user and citizen level that can maybe help in raising the awareness on certain topics like this one.
Sure. Is my microphone working? Yeah, okay. I don't know. You can keep it. Okay. So my microphone is working, and maybe the video will work at some point in my 4th minute of speaking. We can watch the files now. That very nice background for what I'm going to be talking about. My name is Marek, and I'm from I don't need it. A non-governmental and non-profit organization called Tactical Tech, and I just love the fact that I have to define myself, but by negation. I'm non-governmental and non-profit, and I just decided I'm going to go for it. And I tell you what I'm not at this panel, and what I'm not going to be talking about, and it's going to be some sort of a stand-up comedy in a few seconds, which is that we work internationally, and we started with this idea of how information can empower political actor. And political actor we understand very, very broadly. There's everybody from investigative journalists, activists that you can see often in the media, but also somebody that is documenting things, collecting information and data, trying to find evidence, and mostly using information for telling a story that is a different story that is in the mainstream, that you can find around. And we work with people who try to negotiate this space of privacy, space of security in different ways. So some of them require high levels of anonymity and privacy and security because the environment they're living in is hostile to them, to their sources, to their partners, to their networks, and what they engaging may be also a taboo, a problematic issue. Others, however, doesn't require hiding and this kind of forms of understanding of privacy and security because they can benefit from visibility. Actually, for them, the ability to be visible and seen and acting on something is more important than hiding what they're doing, regardless of the risks. And then, there's another group of people that we work with in different communities that are exploiting and exploring this entire spectrum of quantification, data and information and so on, where everybody, including the big companies, industry, designers, etc., we have all very little understanding how it works. And so we make a lot of mistakes. We leak data throughout all over the place and so forth. So I'm just going to wrap it up in such a way that what changed, I think, in our work, that an understanding of information was kind of a passive and controllable thing, if you like, that you can get it, pack it, and do something, design around it, etc. What happens in the last few years is that, and I think what I would like to talk about at this panel and with you here, is the idea that we created a political environment that is very different to other political environments, where we as individuals, and I don't want to use the word users, are data points. On one hand, and everybody here is a techno-utopian. You may be critical, you may be skeptical, you may be bitching about this and that and so forth around technology, data, privacy, etc. But by the end of the day, like many of you are here, enlightened by the screens that you're looking at, because technology is empowering you on everyday basis. You find places, you find people, you find information, you're getting better at certain things, more fit intellectually and so forth. And that creates this amazing paradox that the entire data business that we're living right now would not exist without us. And it's not even dependent on the actual insertion of information that we're feeling about information as we write our email or read something or consume or produce, etc. Now information is you. is the sensors that you have in your pockets walking around, and that information is there and doesn't have any license, if you like, and is being used to train algorithms and to train machine learning or artificial intelligence and so forth, and it's outside of any regulations, user agreements, and things like this and so forth. So what I wanted to kind of talk about is who is in position to use that information? What is the political value of that information? For me, political value is about power, which is about distribution of access to things, about freedoms, is about rights, is about things that are not in the agreement that you're signing, if you even, as we've learned, we don't even read it, and so forth. So those are the kind of principles, and I want to show you the like what we do about it in a way. This little animation, which is before you play it, nobody's seen it, and it's not the final one. So, and it's a low resolution. It's 1 minute. Just look at it. Look at the questions, and I tell you what it is about and what we can do from that. It has sound, but it doesn't matter. So I'm being very cheeky because I told Paolo about it. We're actually opening an exhibition here in New York at Mulberry Street 201, which is a pop-up store. So it looks like a high-tech, high-end, technical kind of an equipment store, but you won't find any devices there. You will find, however, different narratives that we try to bring to people, and when we talk about datafication. And like my point with Paolo was that I don't believe anymore, however, we do a lot of work around visualization and data, that any user interface design can solve any political problems is a smoke screen and a waste of time, actually. Yes, it's important how you access your bank account and so on. The design is very important, but in a political sense, this is not where we can have any discussion about anything, because we have no power whatsoever to have that discussion. We are not there. It's not that room. It's not here. And so we try to find spaces where we can crack, I would say, these walls in different ways, because it used to be, and I'm finishing, it used to be that I kind of thought, and we thought as an organization, that on one hand, we work with advocates and activists, etc., and technology opens this space for us to exercise the fundamental freedoms that we have. And there was the other world, that was the world used by people when you interact with your devices, etc. But it seems like that the world where we can do politics is now defined by everybody use of technology, full stop. And it's shared only between few companies that have enormous accumulation of data, which is knowledge, enormous accumulation of wealth that is just unimaginable, and that creates a specific dynamic of power, and I would like to talk about that in terms of who is user there.
Is it working? So, but I can't accept you leave us with such a pessimistic message. What
okay,
do you
no,
think? What do you think? I mean, it's part of the. I mean, these are so you clearly identified, new arrows in
Yes.
my schema. These are the negative forces we have to fight against. But what are the positive transformations
I think
that we can put in place, not to solve the problem, but at least to make it more, I don't know, visible, understandable?
I think for me, what's really, and it's I think the maybe right time and right place to talk about it. But I'm not in a position. I'm not from here. But I think what just happened here in the U.S. is extremely significant for me working from outside, because the technology is defined and designed by Silicon Valley, full stop, like culturally, ideologically, etc. This is the dominating factor. And the way American companies are doing certain things, it is showing others how they should or could and may do things, etc. But the turnaround here that this system became so vulnerable right now and may backfire, may expose people, may show who is who. And you will think differently about quantification when somebody is using data that you produced with your friends for attributing you certain values, that deciding who you are without asking you who you think you are, and also predicting how you can behave in the future. That would really restrict your possibility of acting politically. And I think, however we may be here depressed about what it's happening and happened recently, it is an amazing opportunity. So I'm trying to be, optimistic on the top of being extremely pessimistic.
So do you think that doesn't make any sense to have a user-centric perspective if the user has no power or would never have a power at all? So.
No, what I'm saying is like we are behind design in that terms. It is a serious political game around our personal autonomy and agency to do something. And we, unfortunately, living in a binary world right now that we can only kind of act against others. And that's not good. And data doesn't help. It's the opposite. Yeah.
So, Laura, help us. Who should we put at the center of our scene? So if it's not the user at the center, there is anything that we can observe, anything that we can... searching for your slides.
Okay, great. So thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. Columbia University is my alma mater. I graduated from the PhD in Communications in 2008, so it's really great to be back, and thanks to the organizers of this conference for inviting me. So I'm delighted to share with you some recent thoughts about what I'm talking about as post-human design, and I'll contextualize that for a moment. I think one example, to pick up on some of Marek's comments, I was thinking a little bit about this Link NYC wireless network system that's being rolled out in New York City, and some of you might be familiar with it. There's been quite a lot of controversy around it. It's all over the East Village. There are these terminals that provide not only advertising, free Wi-Fi, 911 calling. So there are a number of public services that are built in there. And this is being created by a consortium of 3 companies with all abstract names that you may or may not heard of, but one of the key companies in providing that is Sidewalk Labs, which is Google. So I think some of the main critiques have been around the idea that users who sign up to get free Wi-Fi from these terminals, that they're going to be subjected to the same kind of predictive analytics advertising that you get online, and that's going to be location-based predictive advertising. So being that there's been a lot of pushback and a very critical Village Voice article, for example, I think that there's actually a risk that certain users who are more knowledgeable or more aware of data transparency issues may choose not to use that service. They may just use their phone for cellular access, for example. But then users who are less aware or have more barriers, like actually need to get Wi-Fi because they don't have it coming from other services might actually be more at risk. And so I think that we could say it's another example where algorithmic bias could exploit and make, make problems worse, exacerbate existing inequalities. That's how I'd say it. So I'll return to the slide. So this idea of post-human design, I think we're very much, many of the issues that we've already discussed illustrate the blurring between the categories. So some of the key ones, obviously private and public. What data is private and public? There's a lot of blurring going on. And that is the nature of our existence today as people. And so I link here to Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto as one example of where she exposes some of these categories in which we are now living in kind of a hybrid reality. Next slide. So just to contextualize a bit, I think we've been talking about moving from kind of a technocentric model of design of systems to a human-centric and user-centered design of systems. And then I wanted to point out some of the other design traditions using this map from Liz Sanders. So she talks about participatory design research, which has a 30-year history in Scandinavia and also has been done here in the US to some extent. But this is the idea of not only interviewing and observing the users, but actually actively engaging the users in the development of their own technological systems. And this is done at companies in Scandinavia. Also, the traditions of the more critical design and speculative design and cultural probes coming more from the arts tradition. So I think what's interesting at the moment is that there's a lot more ability to work across these different design disciplines and design approaches, and I think that that's really the leading edge of design scholarship, is trying to find ways to do that. Next slide. Oh, previous one. So there's a number of ways in which the idea of the user itself as a category, I think, is being complicated. And I'll say that now there's a lot of discussion in social theory and science and technology studies about non-human users, and that includes machines, things, animals, and the natural environment. There are also discussions about non-users. What is their role? I mean, if you don't, if your project is focused on users and then you don't study them, you're missing a lot of the picture. There's also this idea of the multiple subjectivities, multiple identities, and intersectionality. So, the user itself is such a complicated category. We know things like race, class, and gender, create unique ways of being in the world for different people. Also, this idea of collaboration and participation, which is pointed out by participatory design. And there's also a lot of discussions about, rather than constantly trying to innovate the new, how can we look at existing systems and take more of an attitude of repairing, maintaining, and caring for old ways of doing things, like old infrastructures and technologies. Next. So this is an image from a project called the Driverless City. We just, my research team and I just worked on a one-year project where we looked at driverless cars and autonomous vehicles. And so I think this image, it's a mind map. It shows all the various stakeholders and topics that we uncovered. So that just gives you a sense of, we're really operating in a moment where the majority of things that we're trying to design are at the systems level, at the network level. They require many, many stakeholders and users and objects and things in order to even grasp and understand the space that you're working in. Next slide. So one of the things that I've done in recent years is have a series of these co-design or participatory design workshops, trying to invite policymakers, aldermen, and city council members to come together and think about, especially smart cities technologies and the Internet of Things, and think about the role of values and the way that values, what our responsibilities and commitments and ethics, how those might be embedded into the design of these systems. Next slide, please. And another project related to the future of work, and actually this one invited activists and social justice organizations into the design studio to engage in a speculative prototyping. So we made a series of objects that allow these very complicated technical issues to become like physical objects that we can think through. What are the politics of these various types of approaches, and build on the the activist priorities in terms of, okay, what would that look like in the future if we could conceptualize that. Next. Here's another project. This one was by a team of students. This one is on cultured meat. So the idea of looking at these very long-range future emerging technologies or capabilities and trying to use design and these physical objects as a way of provoking a conversation and engaging with that either through the exhibition or the kind of participatory design engagement that they created for this project. Yep, that's it. So, yeah.
So I have one question, and then I leave the floor to questions that may come from the audience. So designing for a user, creating a solution for a user or for many different users, we can imagine, as Nathan and Arianna probably know, I mean, it's quite complicated. What happens if you say that we have also non-human actors, I mean, that build such a complex network of dynamics? So how can we design these kind of new artifacts, and so that are not addressing the needs of a user, but addressing the needs of a network of different kind of, I don't know how to call them, actors that act probably in many different ways. So what are the competencies that we can put in place to face this new type of user that probably should be at the center of our scene?
I mean, I think it's acknowledging somehow the swinging of a pendulum, from very technocentric to very human-centric, to understanding that technologies do have agency and sort of accounting for both human and non-human agency. And so, I think how to do that as a designer, I mean, I'm looking more at how to build a public conversation about the importance of that, and to reveal what the values and commitments that we have, so that there's more awareness. And then that would demand, I think, a different kinds of approaches.
Okay, and maybe a different combination of disciplines working together, right?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. So any questions from the audience? There are 2 microphones there. So if you have questions, you can stand up and go to the microphones. That's the rule.
Or just yell, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Or maybe,
that's a long way to walk.
Probably yell. Hi, I'm Michael from UCL. Design is an interesting thing to talk about data in relation to, but many values don't emerge from designers and designers' intentions, but emerge as a result of the technologies and the systems that they build and the interactions with each other. What kind of skills would designers need to grapple with those kind of values?
I think the definition of designer has changed significantly over the course of the last 3 years. I am a designer. I was a biostatistician and epidemiologist before. We have systems designers who were teachers and worked in schools and were principals that have now decided to work in design for education, in addition to traditional interaction designers, comms designers, business designers. And so I think that the definition of designer is changing, and that it's exactly what you were saying. It's people from different backgrounds who understand the different points of view. We have software designers, which is not just an engineer that we give to implement, but is constantly thinking about the system as we sit and think about building a new system. And so I think, I just think that it's having the background. I just think it's people coming together from different backgrounds, and that's where great design comes from.
Can because I would like to give you a different answer, actually, just so you have a polarization across the table. I think in the business model that we are in right now, that is entirely based on harvesting and selling data through very sophisticated system of algorithms and so forth, but there's nothing else there. And the design is at this kind of end that is irrelevant to the business model. Like, you can design any interface with any credibility or quality, if you like, and so forth. That doesn't change the business model. And I think what we have to talk about is the business model. Are there any other ways of doing that thing that would serve us services and other things that we have around that would not be that binary and just kind of one directional, that we do the labor produce the information, and then somebody then sells the data for stupid reasons to advertisement, which is the worst possible way of using sophistication of algorithms that are being used. So I think when you talk about designs, I would like to kind of talk and find people who would like to move into the design of systems and models, and then start talking about interfaces, user interfaces, and so forth.
But isn't that the evolution of the design as a discipline, as you say it? I mean, systemic design or this kind of, yeah.
Business model design is a facet of that. And I'd just say there's someone in the room that is definitely worth speaking to in that context. Yogi from My Data in Finland. They released an absolutely incredible white paper that proposes a new model, and it kind of aligns to the Me Too Any models that I was referring to 45 minutes ago. That talks directly to individual participation in the value chain and how that, like, it's not about disenfranchising organizations, right? It's about sort of balancing that power dynamic so people can participate in value chains. And the My Data group have done some incredible work on that, so it's worth checking out.
Any other question from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me from the back?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm Ramin from the University of Southampton, UK. I think it's just really 2 points from this. So I'm a computer scientist by training. I'm in the web science department in the university. I think the first point is more towards the language that we use, the user. Does that kind of change the agency, or does that take the agency away from the human in terms of the way that the language we're using? If as soon as we say user, it assumes that the technology is fixed, that we only use the technology, we don't interact and co-create it. And the second point is, I think, to Laura's, on your slide, reconfiguring the user or using the user, is the way we design things, we don't think about the non-users, we don't think about the impact. So how, in the approach and the kind of methodologies for design, can we take into consideration the non-users and the impact that the design of a technology will have on that?
Laura, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, because I think non-use is a political position. I mean, first you have to understand that there are non-users, and then you have to understand maybe what are the various reasons that someone has opted out. It could be that someone was a user and then has now rejected whatever that is and is not interested anymore, and that's a valid position. So I think one of the difficulties is that within design you have this tension between kind of these universalizing methods in which we believe that we can just take the same methods and apply them in any context, and then the real strong belief in the design field that all experience is kind of situated and embodied, and so that's why we do all this qualitative research, but there's that tension there, and so somehow we're trying to move across traditional science norms, which is like looking for objective, rational truths, and like partial, then sort of the partial positions that are situated and embodied in someone's life. So I think adding any new dimensions to the user or expanding the user to the socio-technical system or network, I'm not sure that we necessarily have a set of methods yet for that, but what I can say is that it's absolutely necessary for the computer science field and the design field, and then also I would say critical social theory to work together, because I don't think that any of them has the capacity to even understand what could be developed or what the public discussion could be about.
Do you want to add something?
I want to add something, but if it's off subject a little bit, excuse me, but it's interesting because I think, at least as it relates to design, we design something and then we look at how it's impacting people or our users or society, and then we iterate. And it's interesting because as we started to design data products, and I focus on digital data products, most digital products are data products, and we have started to think about a new model. So we were designing this tool called Creative Difference, which is an IDEO product, and the first iteration was us designing data and then trying to figure out what like, oh, we're going to ask these questions, we're going to design this tool, and then we're going to see what the impact of that was. And long story short, the product wasn't as valuable. And then we took this other approach where like, okay, let's actually figure out what people, let's like actually design the outcome first, and then go back and figure out how to design the product to meet this outcome. So in this case, it's trying to get what you're saying. I think that we kind of just keep going in this direction versus really figuring out what our goal is and then working backwards to reach that goal. I don't know, just a thought.
The only thing I would add to that on the topic of agency, and again refer you to the work that the My Data guys have done, really, really valuable, is thinking about a human being as a participant in a networked economy. And we're nowhere near there, right? But that's where we're working towards, and particularly for us in Europe, you know, GDPR, PSD2, EIDAS, all coming into effect in 2018. The environment is getting flipped on its head. And for human beings, we are going to actually have agency in the digital economy for the first time ever. We're at the very early stages of trying to figure out what that means. And that's why we're up here having these exploratory conversations.
So I have a couple of questions from the system here used to raise questions from the audience. And yeah, one is about the user. I think this could be the ending point. It was the starting point, and maybe we can end discussing about the user. And of course, you can pose all questions to the panelists after in the coffee break. And so the question is, are we assuming that the user consists of only those who are digitally capable? So this business model is about it's a digital economy. So
not necessarily. That's an assumption.
All the rest, what happens to all the rest? And are they users in a way? What is their position?
Do you mind if I have a quick crack?
Go ahead.
So the hypothesis that we have at Meeco, and the last screen that I put up is a sort of step in the journey towards what we see as the bigger picture. I'm going to use maybe a really bad example, but it's just something so that we can sort of visualize and empathize with this. But think about Tony Stark and Jarvis. Jarvis is like Tony's confidant. He does everything for him. Tony trusts him with his life. Now, the idea of me to any isn't necessarily literally that, although it could be. It's not literally that. But the idea that we as human beings have something that acts on our behalf and enables us to participate as equals in the networked economy, that's really the bigger picture. Now, if we, together as designers, again, however you define that, if we are able to design in a way that those systems, those capabilities, those technologies can orchestrate things seamlessly, whether you're an absolute nerd and you love getting down to the granularity of your agency, so to speak, or you literally want the most hands-off approach possible, we should still be able to facilitate the outcome of individual human participant as an equal in the networked economy. And that's kind of how I would see it sort of working out.
Okay, I'm sorry, there are many interesting questions, but I just taken a last one, and then we have to close the panel because of time. So, well, should the default position of a data subject be that of a consumer? Question mark. What are the political positions a data subject could occupy? Marek.
Who's the lawyer speaking?
Yeah, data subject, what is that?
Data subject could occupy any other political position?
I feel like data subject right now. I don't understand this question.
Okay.
I mean, I think one of the questions is that where is the power in the system? And I don't think that designers are a place where there's quite a lot of power. It's quite often at the very end of a process where they're brought in. I think this was brought up already.
Yeah.
So then figuring out what is the ground zero starting point for whatever is going to be developed. But I think one of the clearest obstacles that we're operating in a networked economy where certain forces are controlling. So then the question is, do we need to create a different kind of economic structure And then can we pilot, prototype, and experiment with what that might look like, and then figure out if that can scale in some way or even survive at a local level?
Okay, I would like to close on giving probably a partial answer to the question about the user that you raised. I mean, last year we didn't have the user. This year we had the user-centric perspective. We knew, I mean, designers are used to debrief the brief, and everybody started questioning about the title of the panel. So nobody wanted to have the user as a word, but I'm happy. So it's a step, in a process. As I said at the beginning, it's an evolutionary process, an evolutionary path. I'm happy with the user now. I'm sure we will have something more in the future, next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.